And we are live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Codementor Office Hours. My name is Wei Ting. I'm your host for today's Office Hours session. And today we're very excited to have our guest of honor, Bryan of Zapier, with us today.
Hey.
Bryan's the co-founder and CTO of Zapier. And Zapier, as many of you know, was founded in 2011. And in just a few years of time, went from Startup Weekend to graduating from Y Combinator, and has grown to become this global juggernaut, a team of 60 plus people remotely based around the world. And Zapier is also widely considered as a thought leader when it comes down to remote distributed team. So very, very honored to have Bryan here with us today to talk about how to manage and work in a distributed engineering team.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
So can you please just do a very short description of yourself and about Zapier?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm Bryan. I'm as you said, the co-founder and CTO here at Zapier. And Zapier was started with three of us, actually. So Wade, Mike, and myself. Wade's the CEO, Mike's the CPO, and myself the CTO. And we kind of go way back to college. I mean, we went to school together and met each other through that. And as you said, Startup Weekend was kind of where it started. But really the core thing behind Zapier that got us like super excited about it was, I mean, Wade and I were like constantly like doing all these little consulting things. There was a lot of like WordPress style stuff. And we're seeing like the same stuff. It's like, hey, could you kind of hook up this form to like MailChimp and do all that? It was all these like very kind of routine things. It's not super exciting. You want to write code. It's like tends to be a lot of the same stuff. So that was kind of the spark for it. It's like, well, maybe it'd be great if we could just like all these little APIs we're working with, like we could just give our users like a tool that just does this for them, and they can kind of wire them up themselves. And that's basically what we started off with at the very beginning. And myself, I had not gone to school for learning to code or anything like that. I had always just been like addicted to it. And for some reason, I just never thought that, coding is actually like a career that I could do. It was always just something I did for fun. So it certainly was not that aspect of it was never like forefront in my mind. Like, I'm going to get into this coding. It was always just, again, solving these little weird problems that our users had and kind of creating little bits of value all over the place. And we just wanted to wrap them all up into like some large platform. And that's Zapier.
Awesome. Just curious, when you guys first started, were all three of you based in the same city, or were you originally based remotely?
We were based in the same city. We were based in Columbia, Missouri, where we were at school. We were all working at a mortgage company. Funny enough, it was a mortgage company that was strictly like online. A lot of their stuff was online. It was an awesome company. But we didn't have a place to work out of. So we'd either kind of like work out of each other's places, or we'd like kind of hang around the office for a little bit longer into the evenings. Or we'd just be working from our own places, like night to night, working over Skype, that sort of stuff. So from the very early days, we didn't have like a central place to call home, right? Like we were just, or an office or anything like that. We didn't rent desks, we didn't anything like that. We were just wherever we happened to be, and we had time, and we just dug in and we're working on it. So we were in the same city, but we were still working very remote-esque at that time as well, because we didn't see each other a lot.
Right. So how did this whole remote thing start to take shape? Like, how did you guys make the decision to go remote? Or did you guys at the very beginning decide that we want to build this into a remote distributed company?
Yeah, so I don't know if we decided like in the very early days that that's what it was going to do. I mean, we were like just trying to build Zapier in the very early days, and a lot of that kind of long-term planning stuff was never really on our radar in terms of how we wanted to do it. We just knew we were going to build this product and it was going to be like this, and we were going to do it. So that's how we were really thinking about it. Where it really became clear that we were going to do this remote thing was we were in the Bay Area after having moved out for Y Combinator, because they want you out there, which totally makes sense to go through the program that way. But the people we wanted to hire are people we really liked. We had someone in Chicago, and we had someone back in Columbia. And so we were like, well, we're going to tell them to move out here. They had families and stuff. So we said, no, I mean, we don't really want to do that. We're working mostly remote. We have been since the early days. The tools are there. We're using the tools. We're all using, live chat and those sorts of things, the hit chats, the campfires, those things, before Slack, of course. But that was what kind of made us think, okay, maybe this remote thing actually works. Like, we could do this. So Micah, who was our first support person hired, he was in Chicago. James, our first engineer hire in Columbia. And we just said, well, we're going to go for it. We're going to do a fully remote, and we're not going to get an office. We're not going to do anything. And Wade, whenever Wade's like in the same building as me, we're just going to like talk over chat the entire time. So from the very early days, we were just like all in on it as soon as it became clear that, okay, this is probably the way that it's going to happen. We just said, all right, all the way. We just kind of did it.
Can you also please quickly share with the audience like how many people you guys have right now across how many locations, what cities?
Yeah. Oh man, that's hard to count. I know we have over 70 people now at Zapier. They're all over the place. I mean, we have folks, like I said, in Chicago. We have folks in Missouri. We have folks out of the country as well. We have folks that are in Thailand, in the UK, in Barcelona. Several people in Barcelona, in the Netherlands, and like New Zealand. I mean, all the time zones that you could imagine to be represented are represented at Zapier. We kind of joke that the sun never sets on Zapier anymore. So it's always something happening inside of Zapier.
So do the team members based in the same cities, like do they also work from home all the time? Do they work so they don't work at any like co-working spaces whatsoever? No, we don't really believe we're not really into the whole like desk sort of thing. I mean, the great thing about doing remote is that you have time to just zoom in and work. Like, there's not distractions, there's not other stuff. Like, you can kind of choose when to come up for air. Someone can't like kind of poke you on the shoulder and say, hey, I need something with X, which can be challenging in some aspects. But the way we've kind of structured a lot of the communication at Zapier we don't want to lose that benefit of like, working remote, where you can go really deep on your thing, not have distractions, set up your environment the way you want it, right? So there's not blaring music or is anything going on. Like, it's your place, right? So no, we don't do any kind of co-working places. We really don't do like the desk rental sort of a thing. We try to encourage people to set up their home office, in their separate room or whatever, and kind of like get that set up so that they have a personal space to work in. Okay, let's talk a little bit about like the hiring process of Zapier. Can you quickly walk me through about how the process is like when you were to hire or interview a typical engineering position? Yeah, so we've gone through this a couple times now. We've gone through it way more than 70 times because we've done multiple rounds before. And even those multiple rounds for the same like role have been, I mean, it's frustrating to spend all that time and then have to do it again. But that's kind of part of the process, and we kind of embrace that. The biggest thing that we've kind of discovered is to really figure out the segmentation of like kind of I guess you want to say the pipeline for that. One's the jobs. We also reach out to a lot of people. I mean, we respect a ton of people in the community, and it would be like really fun to work with them. So we're always like reaching out to folks that we think are amazing. That's like kind of the first part. So we call that kind of just the general screening, and we use a few pieces of software for that. I believe we use Workable for that, which is really nice way to model like just kind of picking out like, oh, this person feel like they have the skills that we need for the job. That kind of like helps us like trim it down. So that's that first pass. We usually get a couple people that are going to work with them, or the manager or hiring manager, to also be involved in it. So there's some diversity of opinions, and we even have some Chrome plugin. We have a lot of Chrome plugins that are custom to Zapier, but one of them we have made by an engineer at Zapier, Jordan. He has it blinded out, so you can't see who that person is. You don't know if they're male or female. You don't know what color of skin they have. Like, you don't know anything. The only thing you really know is what they've answered for those questions, which is really, I think, a fun way to go about like doing this, because you actually don't have any other cues. You just have the message in there, which is really cool. So that's like the first part.
After we get a couple that go through on the next part, we do something we call a job fit interview. And that's just kind of, some people would probably call it a phone screen, right? Where we go a little more in depth. I mean, it's usually about, well, I guess it's about a 30-minute chat. And this is just kind of saying, hey, are you really into the kind of role that we're talking about here? Are you not, kind of a rude, awful person? Like all those sorts of like standard sorts of things is part of the job fit. And then we go on to the skills fit interview. And that's the one that's a little bit longer. That could be anywhere between about 2 hours is where we cap it at. And we have a couple of different interview questions that we've gone through. And this is really a chance for those talented folks to like shine, right? Like this is where a lot of signal comes from for us. And we're doing all of this on video. Like this is all like done with Zoom, with Skype over the phone. But with that, for engineering specifically, we really like having questions that are simple on the surface, right? That kind of let you just get the basics out and then kind of progressively get a little more complex and have some stuff under the surface that you could really like sink your teeth into. That way, folks who aren't really, really talented, or as talented as we're looking for, still feel like they're doing a great job, they completed the task. But the people who are really, really amazing go above and beyond, like blow you away, and it becomes very, very clear during the course of the interview that you have someone amazing on your hands. So that's kind of the skills one. That's the one that we've refined many, many, many times. We found that the more kind of specific you are, the better you are articulating the problem. And the smaller it is in the beginning and the more it grows as you go deeper, those tend to be like positive things in terms of getting signal out of the interview. And then to wrap up, we have we use this product called Skill Survey, which allow us to do like professional references, which is actually, I was kind of skeptical, but it's pretty cool. And it basically just sends out a survey to some of their professional references, and they get to say good stuff or not so good stuff about them, and we get a good kind of third-party look. And then finally is the offer there at the end. So it goes from just application filtering, and everyone gets like, the other thing we do is everyone gets replies every 7 days, no matter what. Like this is something we've been on the other side of getting gigs before, and it's awful to throw your name into like a black hole. So we really stepped up and said that we're gonna really communicate with the folks who are applying. So that's that first part. Then we do the job fit, skills fit, references, and hire at the end.
So how do you determine if someone is actually a good fit for like a remote position? Is there any particular personality or background or experiences that you look for?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you find someone who's done it before, well, they've just done a remote gig before, or they've worked in a team that was partially remote. So they have like sort of a background to like fall back on. In other places where you don't have that, other things are kind of remote-esque, right? Like consulting's like a classic one. A lot of times you're not there with the client the entire time. So that's a really nice signal. Really though, when it comes to remote, you're looking for someone who can communicate. So that first email that comes to us and that process of emailing us back and forth to kind of set up times and logistics for stuff, that actually is a big part of the signal for us and our hiring, because that's literally how we will communicate day to day going forward into many years in the future. So that's not just like the stuff in between the interview. That's also part of the interview. And it might seem a little bit weird, but we're constantly talking over email or over Slack or whatever. So that is a good approximation of the sorts of ways that we work. So the clarity there, how quickly they get back to you, all of that kind of like bakes into the sort of decision process for that. So there's a couple things you can look for, and you're looking for people who have, ability to be autonomous. Usually that comes with, seniority or skill set or just kind of hustle. Like you can pick up some of those things as well, especially if they've done independent projects and they just went out and did them because they thought they just thought the world needed that. That's also a great signal for us. There are anti-signals. A lot of times people come to us and the only reason they want to work for Zapier is because they want to work from home. From home. They want to work from home, which is usually not a great signal. Like like you're competing with everyone in the world at this point, right? So if you just want to work from home, and that's like you're in, that's hard. I'm not saying that that's wrong. Like I love working from home. I would totally prefer to do that. So that's a great reason to want to work at a remote company. But you got to remember, you're competing with like a brilliant, student, in Chennai, India, right? Like that's in the UK, out in the middle of UK. Like it's a worldwide kind of like competition at that level, which is also really great part about hiring remote. But that would be my kind of like, if there's people on the other side that are like looking like, oh, I'd love to get a remote gig. It's like, it starts at being really talented, and then the remote gig kind of comes in.
Do you have any favorite interview questions that help you determine whether this guy might be a good fit culturally in a remote position?
Yeah, well, a lot of my kind of interview style is where I'll go into projects and stuff that they've done and try to pick out those things where they found something that needed to improve and they just improved it themselves, right? Rather than less about like, tell me a project you were assigned to do and kind of a thing, but more of those things that you've kind of went out on your own to discover or explore. There's other interesting ways to get that. Like, tell me something that I don't know about, a topic that's relevant, right? Like, what are you an expert in, right? Like those sorts of things are interesting because you don't become an expert in something via just kind of being exposed to it in a light way, like you were really diving into it. So that's often a good, strong signal. If you can ask someone if they're an expert, like, tell me something I don't know about that. Like, what's something cool? And if they can follow up with something really cool, or sometimes they can just, like, if you don't stop them, they will tell you 100 things that are really cool about that. So those are often like good little pieces of signal to have in an interview. But I've iterated on questions for interviews a million times. I feel like just having some freshness from the interviewer's side is also good because it's like a two-way thing. So a lot of that it's a bit more complicated than just like reading off like questions on a sheet, right? We tweak them and we're often like adjusting them as we go. So it's a bit complicated, but yeah, those are a few of the questions I use. Stuff like that.
Have you guys ever lost a strong candidate due to the fact that you guys are remote? For example, someone they just want to work with.
Oh yeah,
someone
totally.
in a real office.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate when that kind of happens, when someone, because we're not hiding the fact that we're remote. Like we tell people, hey, you're going to work remote. You're going to have to, like, if you're the kind of person that just like hunkers down in your home and you're kind of a homebody and you need some external like force to get you out and work is that for you, it's like you might suffer, in a remote environment, right? So we're often not like, we're certainly not hiring in a, kind of in a blinded way on that. What we try to do is just be very clear about that. Like, listen, like our advice to a lot of candidates is like, sometimes you are your own worst enemy in this case. Like it will be like 10 p.m. and if you open up your laptop and like look at Slack, there's going to be people doing cool stuff. And you have to have kind of the willpower to say, whoa, I'm not going to get into that. Right. So there's different sides. You can get sucked in too much. You can feel isolated. So you really have to seek out that balance and you have to want to seek that out. It doesn't happen automatically. Whereas like if you have an office, you kind of get that implicitly. You commute to the office and then you commute home and you're gone, right? Like you're not in the office anymore. The office kind of follows you around. It's like right next door. I mean, it's like literally in the next room from you. So you do have to seek out that balance. And if you don't want to be the one to like maintain that balance, we've certainly seen people turn down an opportunity at Zapier to work in an actual in-office environment for sure.
Got it. In addition to permanent hires, how about like hiring remote freelancers? Have you guys ever worked with any remote freelance developers before, and how did that go?
We have. We did that a few times in the early days, and it went okay. The problem that we saw with that is the time commitment to really like ramp them up and like get going with it was so high that to lose them in 3 months or whatever, whenever the contract ended, it just didn't work out for us. We also didn't have as polished an onboarding process. We didn't have as polished documentation. Like we really invest in that stuff nowadays because you kind of have to as a remote team. You don't have someone to poke on the shoulder. So we've really invested in that as we've learned more. So we probably could like reintroduce some of that stuff. But in the early days, it was just too much overhead really for a short-term sort of a thing. So we kind of backed away from it. So we have done it. I would say for folks out there who are thinking about doing it, like be wary about it unless you have a really strong set of documentation. If you could parachute someone in that like, this general stuff, like especially an engineer, like, I really understand Django and Python, and then you could just parachute them in and they could be, a positive force on the team. You can probably pull it off, but if you have a complex app like Zapier and you have to invest all this time to get people to like understand sort of the complexities with it, it just didn't work out for us. But not to say it won't in the future. Zapier is getting bigger. We could probably pull out like little chunks of stuff in the future. So,
All right. Let's talk about tools a little bit. What are some of the tools that you guys use that you would definitely recommend to people managing remote teams?
We use, on the hiring side, I had mentioned some of the tools we use. We use like Workable, we use Skills Survey. The tools we use like in the day-to-day side of stuff, Slack, like all the time. We use, Google Apps, all that kind of standard stuff we use. For engineering side of stuff, of course, GitHub. A lot of these kind of like standard off-the-shelf tools that anyone can sign up for and use are the ones that we use. Like we are using them professionally day in, day out. I'm trying to think if there's any tools that we use that are a bit kind of like out there. We use, again, like a lot of the stuff, it's like Google Sheets, Trello. We use Quip that does a lot of our documentation. We've built our own tools. That's another thing that I think people kind of, or we've built tools to augment tools we use. We use Help Scout. Help Scout is a ticketing system, customer service tickets. And we've built our own Chrome extension that just sits in the sidebar, pulls in everything you want to know about a particular customer, how much they paid us, how long they've been a customer, what integrations are they using, hot links to like auto pull down their logs or log in as them and see their zaps. Like all of this stuff exists, and we kind of custom built this. So we use a lot of off-the-shelf tools that anyone can get, but we've also built our own to kind of augment them and do more with them, which I think is actually, I don't know how many companies do that, but I would highly recommend that if there's something that annoys you in your favorite app, and you're like, if they just added a button right here, my life would be so much better. It's like, learn a little bit about Google Chrome extension scripting and just add it in there, because if it saves you, or for us, saves our team of 20-something support people 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes a day, that adds up really, really quick, and you certainly pay that off very, very fast. So yeah, we use a lot of off-the-shelf stuff, but we've also built a lot of custom sort of tools as well.
Right. So how about like the day-to-day running the engineering team? Do you guys do daily scrum remotely? How does that work?
So we don't really do scrums in the sense, or any of the kind of buzzwordy sort of things. The way that we kind of organize our teams we kind of call it like home team, away game. So we have home functional teams. So we have like a product engineering team, we have a front-end engineering team, we have an infrastructure engineering team, we have data. So we have all these different like teams that are kind of functional based. And then projects stand up across the org. It might be, we're going to add X feature and we need designer, we need front-end engineer. And then they would go and play an away game, basically. They would join that team for the duration of that. And then as soon as they wrap up, that kind of team would disband, they'd go back and they'd be kind of redistributed. And that really kind of happened for us a bit organically. We had always been on this sort of idea of kind of like loosely allocating resources as we need them. And what the really thing that we needed to do there to make that work really well is to have a strong kind of like idea of what projects are kind of coming up, so that there's not the allocation can happen just in time, but the planning itself is like kind of well thought out and we know where we're going, right? One of the big things we're doing now is adding kind of the team aspect of accounts for the product, which if anyone's gone through the SaaS, continuum of you have individuals, you add team accounts, like completely blows up all your schema and everything. So we're chunking that up. So that's a classic example. In the early parts of it, it's very heavy infrastructure product engineers because we have to change out the schema, right? And then as it goes further, it's more on the front end side. So we need more design and front end help. And it just kind of progresses along that path, and it lets you kind of like pick out folks on the team that are more suited for the particular task at hand. And then as that disbands, you just go on to the next step, So that's the way we kind of do it, this kind of home team, away game sort of process for projects and approaching that. And then at that level, the PM for the particular team that's playing that game is in charge of like really keeping track of stuff. They're keeping the cadence up. They're setting the dates. They're making sure that no one's getting blocked. So it's a much more kind of personal interaction with the PM at that point.
Okay, here's a related question from the audience. So how do you make sure that everyone is on track? Do you have daily chats, virtual meetings, audios or videos?
Yeah,
and,
we do daily chats are like constantly happen. So in Slack, we stand up teams for that. So if there's a section of adding team accounts, we would stand up a Slack room for that. That's where all the stuff's happening. The main people who are involved in that project or in that room, and they're chatting about stuff. They're saying, there's a problem with this. I think we're gonna have to change out, a particular component here, whatever. All those sorts of like kind of routine conversations are happening in that room, and it can be super high signal because not everyone on the entire team at Zapier is in that room to kind of like get involved. You certainly could join it and like kind of be a fly on the wall. All the rooms in Zapier are completely open, but it lets them focus on that. So that's kind of the way that we do daily chats. The virtual meetings, we actually do those weekly for each project. And that's a good opportunity to just get like that high bandwidth face-to-face formal sort of setting of like discussing stuff. Because then you can be sure everyone sees something, right? Because you can all be in the same kind of visual space. So that works really well, and we do that kind of weekly for each thing. And then for individuals that are on the team, every single week we have what we call a Friday update. So on Friday, everybody posts we have an internal blog. It's kind of a custom pseudo Reddit, WordPress kind of hybrid that we've built, that you get to do a Friday update. You kind of just go over a lot of your stuff. You provide a TLDR so everyone can kind of just quickly scan it and see what you're up to. And that's how people kind of keep track of what others are doing on their team. So you can kind of, there's a lot of ways to grab that information. And so this is a great opportunity for a PM can scan all those logs, jump back to that, can go to the Friday updates of the past to see what they were like thinking they were going to do next week that they didn't get to this week. So there's a lot of these tools to provide that sort of information. And that's generally how we do that. And we track it. A lot of the projects are tracked. We have Trello with boards and stuff with the kind of traditional sorts of like task breakdown sort of thing, which help us mostly how do you want to say, kind of like set the order of operations so they're known, and then things just kind of happen, work organically. It's the team works good.
Another question is like, how do you run like team meetings remotely effectively? Or like are live meetings still the default ways of communications, or do you?
Yep. Yeah, we do a lot of live meetings. And the way that we do live meetings is things we basically do to make them a little simpler. It gets hard to schedule them, first of all, but the way we get around that is we videotape all of our live meetings, and they go up on, we use Wistia, and anyone on the team at that point can go in and watch them, which is great. So if you're busy or you don't want to get up, it might be at 9 p.m. Your time, you're going to get ready for bed, or it might be really early and you don't want to get up for them. You can still kind of participate by watching the video and kind of getting involved that way. For the individual sort of team, the individual teams that are involved in that, they have a little more time to a little more flexibility in how they want to schedule it, right? So they can look at their team composition and figure out a nice time for that. But they also still usually videotape that, and it goes up, and other people can kind of jump in and watch that.
Thanks. Let's talk about an interesting topic, time zones. Like working with team members at different time zones can really be painful for some people.
Totally.
Like how big of an issue is this for Zapier, and how do you guys overcome this?
So time zones they can be tricky. The way that we deal with them is we try to make sure that all communication is effective asynchronous. It's just like, I mean, you think about many different styles of programming. You have synchronous and asynchronous, and they require totally different trains of thought, right? And how you approach them. The way that we structure our team is much the same way. We try to set up everything to be asynchronous. That means whenever something is blocking your forward progress on a particular task, you have another task that can pick up, and you can run with that one. And trying to break these up into smaller like units so that they're not ordered in such a way that one path blocks all the rest of them. So that's one way you can do it at a structural level to lessen the impact of time zones, right? Another way that we deal with this is we actually use time zones to our advantage. There's a lot of places where this works out great. Think of customer support. We can have round the clock support by hiring in Pacific, Asia, European time zones. So we have a lot of kind of diversity in time zones, which actually benefits the company, right? And then also for on-call stuff, it also kind of helps too, because if there's someone that's on the other side of the world and they can kind of knock down an alert, someone doesn't have to get up in the US, right? So there's a lot of like nice things there as well. But really a lot of the focus that we have is on kind of the project and the kind of individual level of trying to make sure that time zones aren't negatively impacting a particular project. And a lot of that is more of a structural, just making sure that you're setting up tasks so that there is a way forward, even if something gets blocked. And a lot of that involves just, queuing up a bunch of other stuff that they could be working on. And a lot of our stuff as Zapier is like super, super wide. So folks have a lot of autonomy to like jump from task to task. And that's expected. That's built into the culture. So no one's stressing out if you're not able to continue a task for the rest of the day because of some particular thing. Everyone knows that, hey, that's just how it works. You're jumping onto something else and being productive in another way.
Got it. And we've noticed there's still a lot of engineering managers or CTOs who still prefer to work with local candidates or remote candidates with plus minus 3 or 5 hours of time zone differences.
Right.
Right. What kind of advice would you give them?
I certainly think that having people in the same time zone or like in the same office basically dictates the same time zone is easier. There's no doubt about it. But you are missing out on a lot of the good stuff, right? Like if you've ever had folks complain about kind of the on-call schedule, right? Like time zones can be a way to knock down some of that stress. There's a lot of opportunity whenever you're hiring remote to get really talented folks, right? Like these are, again, like you have a global, platform to hire from. So that amazing engineer in Hong Kong, like you can hire them. You don't have to convince them or get an H-1B. You don't have to do all this other nonsense to hire them. But you do have to work around time zones. And like I said, I think the best way to work around time zones is just be very clear about the kinds of things that you need them to do as like their core, but give them tons of extra stuff so that they can kind of load balance between other things as they get blocked on their main thread, right? And if you do that and you provide lots of kind of room for that and you are cognizant of it, you can actually reap a lot more benefits from having remote folks because you can hire really, really talented folks, give them the kind of autonomy to like touch a lot of stuff in your system. And it kind of works itself out, right? That doesn't mean that it's like easy. There's still a lot of times where you do have to find those overlapping hours so you can meet with them or you can get them together with the team or whatever. And that can be tricky and it can be a bit of a pain. But there's a lot of tools out there that help you schedule that sort of stuff. So the logistics aren't hard. Just getting someone to say, yeah, sure, I'll stay up, late to attend a meeting that just has to be kind of part of the process. And people have to understand that, yeah, you're going to have to kind of adjust, but you can sleep in that day or whatever, right? So you have a little bit of give and take for all those.
So has there been any instances where a candidate was not hired or was hired, but end up not working out due to like not enough overlaps in terms of time zones?
No, we've never had that happen. We've never had a situation where because of the time zone or something like that, it wasn't working out.
Okay, well, that's really good to hear.
Yep. I mean, maybe that's because we have a fully remote team. So there's that's expected. Like multiple time zones are expected, and we embrace that. So.
Right. Let us quickly jump into a question from the audience. Like, how do you motivate the remote team members to work with you? How do you fairly pay them? While knowing the right amount of the profit to pay for yourself?
Yeah, those are great questions. How do you motivate them? Kind of goes back to hiring. So one of those classic reasons why we don't get excited about a candidate that just comes to us and says, I'd like to work from home. If that's the only kind of intro you have to Zapier, that is, again, you're competing with folks across the entire world, some of which are sending emails in like, hey, I am a core contributor to XYZ library. I've been using Zapier for 2 years, and this is amazing, right? Like, that is the sort of like competition level you have. So when you find people like that really love Zapier and love the idea and love APIs and love how things get connected and like this idea of like giving tools and power to that have traditionally been tied up in engineers, if you don't know how to code, you can't automate stuff. Now we're kind of like changing that. If that gets you excited, then motivating them is very simple. You just give them a chance to impact Zapier. Like it works out really, really nice. So I think that happens at the hiring stage. And then the other thing is probably kind of like going on as you work with them over time. It's just making sure that, they're staying engaged with the sorts of projects you have and that you're taking the sorts of things that they're seeing in the system and really giving them an ear to have a chance to change that, improve that, find those things that they're passionate about. And I think that's just kind of classic management there. Nothing particularly funky. And then how do you fairly pay them? This is a bit tricky. So we try really hard not to underpay people relative to what like a general great salary in the States would be, right? What we try to do is find a good middle point for a lot of folks between what that engineer would make, in a decently warm market in the US and what like a top tier engineer in their market would have. And we try to pick something that would be comfortable in there. It is a tricky one because compensation is a very kind of like multifaceted sort of thing to come up, and it's super personal in terms of different places people are in their life. But that's really where we try to start, and then we just try to work with the candidate to figure out, okay, where does this actually lie? Like, what are your plans? How does Zapier fit in? That sort of stuff. And usually we can kind of come to an agreement there that both people are pretty happy about.
Awesome. That's great. Another question is like from the developer's perspective who are working remotely with a team, like what can they do to help them become more successful remote team members?
That's a great question. So from the developer side, so someone who's like contributing, like what sorts of things would they be doing to be more successful? That's great. That's a great question. So I think a lot of that is knowing how to manage yourself is a big part of that, right? So it's simple stuff, right? It's like saying, it's like being available enough, but not being distracted by things that are happening, right? So it's still being able to kind of like focus in and get some work done. But if someone kind of pings you, having that kind of knowledge, like, hey, heads up, I'm hacking on X, right? But give me 20 minutes and I'll help you out. Or if you're at a good stopping point, like just answering it right away and not losing your context or your active session. That is definitely tricky to do, and there's a lot of opportunity to be distracted in a remote environment when everything is at your fingertips, right? Like in a lot of offices, like you have physical space that separates you from, you know, a meeting that's happening right over here. Whereas, you know, it's Zapier, a remote team, it's literally happening in that channel or that room you have access to, right? So you just have to kind of like step away from it, right? And I think that's all on the company to say, hey, we get it. You're busy. You're hacking on your own thing. We don't need you to respond in 5-10 minutes, right? If you come back in a couple hours and give an update, like that's great. That works. It's on that person that asked that question to find a workaround or shift into something else. And that's also part of the skill too. It's like finding those clever like workarounds. Like, okay, I can't complete that until I get, you know, a little bit more context on that. So how can I work around that? I know there's more stuff I can do that I'm going to have to do eventually, and bring that in and trying to, you know, kind of trying to get that pipeline a little more flexible in terms of where you can apply some effort. So there's probably a lot of tactical stuff. That's a great question. That would be a really great like blog post to like wrap up. And, like some of the top hints on being effective in a remote environment, because there's a lot, and I'm having a hard time pulling them out of random. So
sure. So speaking of culture, like, are there any interesting things that you guys do to try to create a cohesive culture for the folks to have a sense of belonging while being widely distributed?
I mean, a lot of our culture is like internet culture. So if you're on on Reddit and Hacker News and these sorts of like places that have kind of, you know, just those, that kind of irreverent sort of humor and the memes and those sorts of things, those sorts of like underlie some of the comedy and some of the funky in jokes and stuff at Zapier. So there's a bit of that for sure. It's not like certainly required by any means. You just see it kind of popping up, and I think people connect that way. There's a lot of we do a lot of in-person stuff as well. Those are punctual pieces. Twice a year, we get together with the full team to do remote. What do you want to say? Remote. We get the full team together to do an on-site retreat, and those work really, really well. And those are about a week long, and that lets everyone kind of get together. We kind of do a light hackathon there and try to scope down really small so people can kind of get something shipped and work on stuff that normally doesn't get on the roadmap, but also just work with each other, you know, chat about stuff, play board games, like all these sorts of like little things that you don't get to normally do around socializing happen at the retreats. And then also we do onboarding as well. Whenever someone joins the team, that first week, one of the first weeks, we try to fly them all out together. We do like in-person onboarding. It's higher bandwidth. You get to meet some folks on the team, and that works really, really well. And then a lot of the video chats that we do every week. We do a full team kind of thing, which allow new people to do like kind of a short presentation of something they love. And we've seen all kinds of stuff. We've seen talks from, you know, ultimate frisbee to nuclear submarines to, you know, how to survive a zombie apocalypse, like all these like cool little things that let people kind of show off some of the stuff that they're into. And there's like a little QA session. So there's a lot of opportunity to do that. And then a lot of it's also just kind of your standard internet sort of culture, sort of things happening.
Do you guys have any interesting Slack channels that exist just to build this culture?
Yeah, there's a constant feud going on. So we pre-pinned all of our Slack channels with different. So there's like feed dash whatever. So that's like automated feeds of content. Then there's fun dash whatever, right? And those are usually the fun, goofy ones. And then there's like, you know, team dash. So those are like the short-term teams. But we have a few, like we have fun dogs and fun cats, and those are constantly at war with each other because I'm a dog person, so I'm constantly in there, you know, boosting up the dog representation at Zapier. But there's a lot of that stuff, and I think that stuff's like really nice. It's just cool to see other people that are into the same sort of things as you are and chat about it. That stuff works really nice.
Cool. There's this belief that remote teams will only work if the entire team is remote, and might not work as well if there's like a centralized head office, but only a few people will be working remotely. In essence, basically, hybrid might not work.
Right.
What's your take on this?
There may be some truth to that. I don't necessarily think that is like the rule. What I think is probably true is just slapping remote onto an existing, well-functioning in-person team without much thought is probably a recipe for not great. I would say that doing remote properly requires thoughtfulness and like care. Like you have to like set up your organization to have these sort of asynchronous modes of communication, to have documentation as like the core. It's like it's not shipped until it's documented sort of stuff. Like those sorts of things are critical to fostering, people who are in different time zone. They need to figure out, how do I deploy to a Canary server? Well, there should be a piece of documentation that shows you exactly how you do that so they're not blocked, right? That sort of a stuff you lose if you can't just tap on someone's shoulder, right? And you have to like purposely bring those people in and involve them. When you have all hands, when you have interesting little conversations, like one of the things we do, and I think is really hard to do in an in-person thing, is those informal chats like, hey, can we do a quick video chat to talk about this? After the end of that, and it might be only one or two people in that, one person would be very lonely, but 2 or 3 people in that video chat. And we'll kind of recap what we said. We talked about X, we talked about Y, and we think we're going to do Z, right? That's really, really important. And I don't think that sort of stuff happens automatically in kind of a mixed environment, right? Like if you have lunch with someone and you're like, that's a brilliant idea. We're totally going to do that. We're going to stop doing X. How does that get like spread back to the rest of the team? If you don't have a purposeful way to share that information, it's not going to happen, right? And that's, I think, where a lot of that isolation from the hybrid happens. I would generally recommend if someone's like, you know what, I want to do remote, like that's awesome. You should probably find a team that does it exclusively, like remote, fully remote. You are almost guaranteed to have you're pretty much guaranteed to have a much better remote experience than some place that's like, well, I guess we don't really do remote, but we'll do it for you kind of a thing. Because that's where I think there can be issues. Not always, but it's much, much, much higher risk, I'd say.
Okay, there's an audience comment saying that it sounds like Zapier takes documentation as seriously as TDD takes testing.
Yeah, we do. And I think that kind of goes back to some of our unblocking stuff, like those sort of like kind of routine sorts of things, like, hey, how do I do X? Like there's a doc for that generally. And we do really believe in documentation. Slack's chat or searching is getting better, so it's often nice to do a search and say, I'm going to go to the DevOps room and search how this happened, or get some context, and that works really, really nice. So having things explicitly spelled out makes remote work a lot better, just because that, especially time zone stuff or not bugging people, it tends to make things more effective. You're just not getting blocked as often.
Just to jump to audience questions first. Like how do investors view such team composition? Like most investors like to see a strong cohesive team.
Yeah.
I wonder,
they're skeptical.
Funny.
Yeah, they're very skeptical. And rightly so. There's not a lot of companies out there that do remote. So I totally see where they're coming from. And for us, the proof has been kind of in the pudding. And we've always been, Zapier's profitable. We don't plan on taking more money. I never want to say never, but like we are growing the company in a way that's, profitable and sustainable. And that we wanted to do that since the early days. This whole remote thing, you often get kind of this feeling of like, okay, so when are you guys going to like kind of grow up and get a real office, right? And then our answer is like, we're not. We're already grown up and we're doing really well. And usually that also helps. Like the proof is in the pudding a lot of times. If investors see that you're being successful with a remote team and you can sell it, because again, there's a lot of great things about working remote, right? And one of the best ones, I've said it already a couple times, is the talent pool is so much larger, right? That's a really easy one. If an investor comes to you, it's like, oh yeah, this is not going to work. Like, well, look at hiring. Like instead of this crazy market in the Bay Area where you're competing with Google, right, and Facebook, which are like minting money, and not everyone wants to live in the Bay Area, right? You might have family back in, Florida or something that you want to live with. That is a really kind of compelling argument. They understand that talent is super important. So I think a lot of that is really how you want to couch it. And they're skeptical, and probably rightly so, especially until it's proven.
Right. I remember there's a recent interview done by Y Combinator with GitLab. Sid's CEO of GitLab, he also said one of the biggest challenges about running a remote team is fundraising.
Yes, I believe it. Yeah.
So speaking of like challenges, like what are some of the other challenges or the toughest things about running a distributed team like yours?
I think some of the toughest stuff is communication. It's like really sharing that information. It's something that we've gotten better and better at, but we still could be even better at. It's just funny how often you'll talk about some topic to someone and they'll be like, yeah, we know, you've said that a million times. We understand. And then you'll say that same thing to someone else and they'll be like, what? Like, what are you talking about? And I think that's just kind of natural. I mean, people are super busy doing the things that they're focused on, right? It would be ridiculous to think that the marketing team who's like super going deep into conversion and, blog content and all this other stuff that we care deeply about has any like inkling how the challenges in engineering is happening, right? So whenever those come up and they're talked about, they're going to be like, huh? Like, really? Like, so you have to kind of find those common threads. You have to kind of find those higher level ways to communicate just general challenges and things that people are going through throughout the entire company and get it in front of them when it's relevant. And that's tricky. And that takes a lot of care and effort. So I don't think it's also probably easy when you're in person, but you have this extra barrier involved with remote, right? Where you have to kind of seek out those people and like hand deliver them that content, which I think has its good sides too. But because you don't get overloaded by other stuff that may not be as important. But yeah, I'd say communication and disseminating those important things require lots and lots of effort when you're remote.
Right, but now looking back, what are some of the biggest benefits that you feel of running this remotely?
Well, I mean, the biggest one I think is just the great people you get. Like, I mean, it's astounding. Yeah, it's astounding. Like there's no doubt about it. There's incredibly talented folks in the major metropolitan areas. There's no doubt. Like there's incredible folks there, but there's also incredible folks around the entire world, like everywhere, right? There's incredible, brilliant people in Spain. There's brilliant people in New Zealand. There's brilliant people in Ohio, right? Like all over the world, there's all these brilliant people. It's just so awesome to be able to tap into them and have them be excited about Zapier and like work on the same product and all together as one. It's just, I don't know. I think it would be much harder I think the stat that we have is, I think 60 or 70% of people who have joined Zapier since they have joined Zapier have like moved. So like, just think of how crazy that would be. Like, I'm sure a portion of those would be like, well, I can't move because I lose my job. But that's crazy. Like, can you imagine that kind of turnover from folks leaving and like wanting to go? Like, I love Zapier. I think it's great, but I have to go move home. Like, I'm having a kid. Like, I want to be next to my family. Like, okay, bye. Like, that's crazy. Like with us, it's like, okay, cool. Well, let us know what days you need off to move. Like, that's fine. Like, it's a totally different like experience, and you get to retain these awesome people you've invested so much in, that you care so much about, that you just love working with. So that's the biggest benefit from remote, I think. And it's just, I like it personally. Like, I just like working in a space that I can control. And I think a lot of folks at Zapier would probably echo that.
This is really awesome. Since we have less than 10 minutes left,
Sure.
let's just quickly go over some of the audience questions.
Yeah.
I guess for like the early stage entrepreneurs managing remote freelancers, any tips or how do you measure daily performance work from remote engineers, especially when you're a non-technical co-founder?
Yeah, that's tricky. I mean, a lot of that stuff I think revolves around just being really explicit about like kind of what you need and kind of maybe stepping up a level. And it's kind of like that leader's intent sort of stuff. Instead of saying, I want you to build X, it's like, I think we should build X and here's why, right? Like kind of stepping back and kind of giving a little bit more context. It's really, really nice when you can get those people on the team that you don't feel like you need to micromanage, like you can just kind of give them the broader goal and certainly outline the specific steps that you think that they should take, but still kind of trust them to kind of rearrange those in the ways that they see fit. Measuring performance, I think, is really, really tricky. I mean, in engineering, it's like classically fraught with error, right? Like lines of code committed, like that's a ridiculous metric to like track, right? So to me, that if you're non-technical, it's really, really hard. If you're technical, it involves getting into the task, understanding what they're doing, being able to code review their stuff. And at that point, you'll have that natural sense of if things are going well or if things aren't going well, right? And that's probably the only real way I think to manage like engineers. Like if you're non-technical, you better really, really trust your engineers. And because that's really the only thing that you have to kind of like lean back on. But if you're technical, you can get in there, you can be a participant, you can really be a part of the process. And then I think there's more respect there, there's more communication, there's more cross-pollination. It's just a much healthier kind of relationship. And at that point, it's a more qualitative and quantitative like measurement, but I think it's probably the more appropriate one.
Thank you. Here's another interesting one. Are certain engineering roles better suited for remote work, front-end, back-end, DevOps?
I don't think so. There are some where there are nicer benefits from remote, especially if you talk about that time zone. You can kind of arbitrage time zones for infrastructure team. Like if you have an on-call schedule, it works really, really nice because if someone's up and normally working, they can knock down errors really quickly and no one has to wake up at 2 a.m., right? Those sorts of things work really, really nice. So I would say that that's one of the really strong ones. But in terms of just like the general work that they're doing, I don't think any of them are particularly more or less suited to remote work. I would say they're about equivalent.
Okay, got it. A few final questions. I guess for the startups still in the early stages thinking about going remote, what kind of factors would you recommend them to consider?
If you're thinking about doing remote, I would step back and say, do we really want to do this? And if we do, really be a part of it and believe in it, right? And dedicate a lot of time and effort into communication, dedicate a lot of time and effort into making processes documented, very simple. A lot of this is like, I think of this a lot like the rallying cry for like real estate data, location, location, location. Like make sure that those bits of documentation pop up when you need them, right? So that means when you go to that deploy job and you're curious, like, oh crap, what do I do to like not do? Should be a link right there to the documentation that explains it, right? When you have some bit of code that has some weird kind of side effect, right? That you're calling it from a funky spot, like that link to that documentation that talks about the larger architecture, right? It's that just in time, not just in time in the sense of creating, but making sure that you have those threads exposed in the right spot so that information kind of can disseminate naturally, because you're not going to be there all the time to tell them, here's that little thing, or here's that little funky thing over here. You want that to happen kind of naturally. And that doesn't happen accidentally. It definitely does not happen accidentally. So it's one of those things where the more you can make sure it happens purposefully and intentionally is very good. And start from day one. Start from the very, very beginning. Don't wait to do that.
This is awesome. Any final tips and recommendations for anyone, startup founders, engineering managers at large organizations thinking about hiring remote developers?
I would recommend, if you want to try remote, don't say only one person can do remote by necessity. Say, like, if you have someone like, oh, like, I think a classic way that this pops up is we have this awesome person on the team, and they need to move away. We don't want to lose them. They're really, really critical. So let's let them work remote. Okay. If you do that, just know that you're like opting into a different world. It's not bad by any means. I think it's actually great, but stop and think about it for a second and maybe consider saying, okay, this team is now remote. Everyone can kind of work remote, right? We don't have the central office idea anymore for this particular team. It's a good way to try it out. I think there's a lot of danger in doing like pieces, like remote piecemeal. Not to say that it doesn't work. I think it certainly can work, but it also takes purposeful. If you're going to do it, step back, really kind of consider it, and make sure you put the processes in place to involve them, to document, to communicate. All that stuff is not going to happen automatically, and it happens in a different way remotely than in person.
Okay. One final quick questions from the audience. Any suggestions on tools, integrations to measure burn down?
Burn down? Burn down in, I'm going to do some Googling because I don't want to burn down. I'm just going to assume that means something like
burn down chart.
A burn down chart. I'm going to have to say I'm not super familiar with a burn down chart. Let's do some Googling and see what Google tells me. Burn down chart, graphical representation of work left. Oh, okay, I see. Yeah, that's tricky. Measuring, I could talk a lot about like measuring what needs to be done versus what has been done. I think that if you think that you're measuring it accurately, you're probably fooling yourself. It's really, really tricky. So I think if you're going to do any of the kind of burn down sort of stuff, and I think it's more broader, like this is the estimation of work to be done. Just make sure it's understood that it's with a grain of salt. Like we always have that chance to like kind of go back and like revisit it. And in terms of what was the question, the context was specifically around burn down.
It's more about a managed team project velocity when you have different skill level engineers.
Oh, I see. Yeah. I would say for a lot of that stuff, for us, it's a lot of code review across different skill levels, making sure that people aren't getting blocked by little particularly tricky bits. And as maybe like a PM's role is like pretty important there, is making sure that things kind of get allocated properly. As you run into like a tricky part, like make sure that if someone who's, a bit, uneasy about it has someone that they can reach out to and they're appointed as like that kind of reach out. In terms of like how much work is left to do on that, I think that's something you just have to constantly revise as a team, because you're going to get it wrong over and over and over again. So being aware of that, I think it takes the stress away from it, right? It's like, oh, we're missing our deadlines. We're completely failing. It's like, no, we just kind of misestimated what this would take. Let's readjust. And I think that helps clear it up.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much. This is great.
Awesome.
So I think we're out of time. Thank you so much, Bryan. This is awesome. Any final words or advice for our audience?
I would recommend check out Zapier and use Zapier for some of your integration needs.
Yes,
if you're using any SaaS app and you're like, I wish we could do X with that, Zapier is an amazing tool for you to do that. And although I'm a little bit biased, but
Zapier is definitely awesome. We use Zapier internally at Codementor as well.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you so much. Right. I had a lot of fun doing this, everyone. Feel free to shoot me questions too, Bryan@Zapier.com, if you want any clarification on stuff. I'm happy to field anything, get them all the time. So thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care. Have a good day.